Laptop computer spins onto the screen, opens, and displays ATP Education Program webinar series, closes, and then spins off the screen.
Welcome to the 8th part of our series on adoption versus abandonment. This section focuses on assistive technology process and how that can lend itself to some power in influencing students to adopt the technologies that we know will work for them. Yet again, I am Sayard Bass. I'm a speech pathologist and assistive technology professional. I have some notes here about some other projects I am involved in, and always happy to chat assistive technology. So as we come to section 8, we can see the flow of everything that we've reviewed so far. Taking a look at the QIAT areas to identify what is good practice for assistive technology, the concepts of adoption and abandonment, how feature matching, implementation, data collection, and using a cycle of assistive technology can all set us up for students to receive the best consideration so that we can implement the technology, collect data, and be able to go back and revisit that if needed. And that all comes together in assistive technology process. If we have good process in place, we hopefully can see those signs of abandonment developing prior to a student completely pushing something onto a shelf, seeing behavior, or just non-use of a device. So the best weapon I think we have against abandonment is to have good process. So the objectives within this module are to identify the components of the process that lead to successful adoption. And then secondly, describe the connections between the QIAT indicator areas and successful implementation. So here is a framework that I set up by putting all of the quality indicators of assistive technology together just to demonstrate how they relate to implementation, because how we put the tool into place is going to dictate a lot of whether that adoption happens or not. First off, with administrative support, there needs to be an expectation, almost culturally within the school, that assistive technology is a necessary and needed tool, and that everyone on the team is there to support, that it's not just one person, that it's not just for low incidence, that it's something that's expected to be used in class. And sometimes that takes changing mindset of even teachers within regular education settings. So without the administration on board to help with implementation, it is something that becomes more difficult. With consideration, we have to think about how we're putting something into place. Sometimes we can come up with very simple assistive technology solutions. Other times, sometimes it seems like we're smashing together 2 or 3 programs as well as different technologies. And that's okay, but just know that it is going to be more complicated on the implementation end, and make sure that the team is ready to take that on. Assessment-wise, making sure that whatever we are assessing, we understand the learning curve, we understand the background that will go into it, and make sure that that matches with the student's motivation, as well as making sure that we're doing something that is going to fit the task that a student needs assistance with. So to be able to implement whatever we have assessed for the student, and to review it more than once a year, because honestly, if it's not working prior to that year, we definitely need to take a look at some other ideas. In developing IEPs, this is where documenting how we are implementing is of the utmost importance. There's nothing like getting an IEP that suggests that a student should be using assistive technology, but you don't have information about those small details. Does the student know how to use it? Does the student require training? Does the student only use it in certain classes? That implementation needs to be wrapped into the IEP. There are whole presentations about where we can document this in the IEP, and honestly, by the time you get more familiar with assistive technology, you'll start to notice that it can go in pretty much any and every section if it's supporting that student with their access to their educational environment. We have to collect data, and we know that with everything in education, but with implementation, there needs to be a plan for how we are doing that, and it needs to be clear-cut, doable, and the data does need to be revisited before a student gets to the point where they might not be using the device or technology that's been suggested for them. In transition, even though we are focusing so much on having a student gain access to their free, appropriate public education, many students need to use these tools throughout their life. We still read after we graduate. We still write after we graduate. We still need to have organizational skills. We need to be able to physically access the environment. So even though those environments and contexts might look a little bit different, we do need to make sure that we are planning for students to have what they need as they transition. And implementation can help with this as well by knowing, what might the family need to purchase? Who might they need to connect with in the community or at the university level or through the Department of Rehabilitation Services or Voc Rehab? There are many different ways that we can make those connections as long as we've written it down and demonstrated how we will implement them. And then finally, professional development and staff training. When it comes down to it, I think this ties into a lot of other things as well, especially that administrative support, setting the expectation that we are integrating assistive technology just like any other accommodation. I always like my AT is an accommodation with stuff. It's a very generic term, but I think it can help people get in line with, even though it's a different program or a different device than other students might be using, it is helping them to accommodate and get into the environment. So in revisiting some of the factors that we saw going into abandonment, we always need to remember that the student's opinion, assistive technology is one place it's really going to matter, and we need to take their opinions at face value. We need to make sure devices are something that we can get a hold of, that it performs well, and that we monitor what a student's changes in priorities are. And, there's always that dance of, we want you to do well in school, we want to take your opinions into account, but we also want to give you enough agency that you see your achievement as a motivator. I have a colleague who brought up to me that, assistive technology, if we're getting a student to truly adopt it, what we're really building up is their intrinsic motivation to succeed. We're showing them that they are able to succeed with the use of this additional tool. And so if we can build that intrinsic motivation, that's going to help them set their priorities so that they might overcome some of these other things that might lead to abandonment. By building that motivation, you can definitely influence those social and personal factors, as well as maybe counteract the effects of if a device isn't performing correctly, or being able to self-advocate if you're looking for more training. So keep in mind these abandonment factors. And one abandonment factor is not something to say, oh, well, we're sunk because, this isn't going to work for the student because of the social aspects. They are things that can be worked out as long as we come at it with a team approach. And in understanding adoption, always keeping in mind that there's not just one characteristic that gets a student to use a device. We need to help them be thoughtful about what their needs are, which I know with some students, it takes a lot of work to get them to have that insight, and it might not be there due to their age yet, but we do need to show them success in order to keep them moving on. So this is where the whole team needs to come together and provide the student with support until they have enough independent use of the device to really see the purpose in continuing to use it. Again, that intrinsic motivation. We know that as AT specialists, we're very much into always finding some kind of solution. And I think we can get that excitement to the parents as well. But just remember that even though us as teachers or AT specialists might get really excited about this, the user and the caregiver need to see success in order to move towards adoption. That's just kind of the bottom line. If you turn on a device and it doesn't do the magical thing that it's supposed to do, it's hard to get that trust back. So what we want to think about as we pull process together is especially these 4 areas. These are the 4 areas that have been highlighted at the beginning of the presentation as well. You have to think about, in our organization, at the bare bones, very least, this is what you're doing to get your acceptable on your rating. What does consideration look like? What does assessment look like? Implementation and evaluating effectiveness. Every teacher on your team should be able to do this at a basic level. This is something that we could even teach students to do at a basic level. This is what AT process really can help with integrating into making those changes that I discussed. We need to culturally change our mindset in a school, and we need to have implementation and processes in place that are consistent. In looking at this, I like to think of the frameworks and the consideration worksheets that come with a lot of the materials from either the task demand analysis, the Georgia Project for Assistive Technology, the SET framework, and of course any others that might prove useful in a specific case for a student. But by using those, I think you can create the plan. Another valuable tool that I would be remiss if I did not go into is the idea of a decision tree. This is something that can be useful to the team in explaining the process. However, I'm going to go through just a couple examples to show you why assistive technology, even though we do have cases that fit within that decision tree model, a lot of it comes down to, quote unquote, it depends. I've been to a few meetings with lawyers where we've discussed assistive technology processes, evaluation, assessment, consideration, and the majority of the answers we get back from the lawyers were, it depends. And when they asked us questions, it was, well, it depends on what's happening with the student as well. So what we can see here is it just starts with a basic question of, do we have sufficient information to make a decision, yes or no? And then where do we go from there? So this is a process coming from one school district where they are asking themselves, hey, can I do consideration on my own, or do I need to put in an assistive technology referral? There are some nice guiding questions. You can see it logically goes from A to B to C to D. Although, if you look at all the steps in here, if a teacher feels comfortable making that decision, then there's still a lot to go through for assistive technology consideration. I think that one thing I have seen in a few organizations is that it leads to a lot of referrals when really staff does have the capacity. So it takes some building of the staff confidence, even when you use a decision tree. This other example is actually from the Illinois Assistive Technology Guidance Manual. And if you go to that link there, it does give you a little bit more of an expansion as well as an evidence base for what each of these boxes is symbolizing. So this is also looking at AT consideration, reviewing the current information, developing your IEP, and then moving into your consideration process. Can the student perform their IEP tasks? Okay, let's move on from there. Yes, no, and it comes all the way down. To people who work in the assistive technology field, this does feel very logical, though I know especially for new teachers, they see this and they're like, that is a big decision tree. So even if you are using something like this to delineate your process, you want to make sure that there is continuing education on it, or other ways of showing or building that staff capacity before turning them loose. This one's in color. They have a lot of common branches once you get into them. Down here, you see, if you get even deeper, is the student using their AT? Is the AT working? Okay, we document it. What other areas can we do? Do we need an AT evaluation? One thing with the decision trees also that just creates some hesitancy for me is, are we then promoting only looking at the assistive technology at the time of the IEP? So I think decision trees are a great tool. It's just finding the way to integrate that information so that people are understanding the consideration and decision-making process so that when they move into the implementation phase, they're ready to go. And I understand the decision tree concept. In fact, I was involved last summer when we had nothing else to do because of quarantine, in trying to create our own way to look through this. I created a Google form with some other assistive technology professionals. You can take a look at it here. It will make a copy. Is actually really fun to work on from an AT brain perspective, though every teacher I've showed it to has just looked at me and shook their head and is saying, "Oh, okay, Sayard, that's cute." Keeping all of this in mind, just know that when you have assistive technology process, that it has to be workable for the people in your organization, because even though the student and the parent are huge influences in assistive technology, the teacher has to be prepared to consider as well, even if there is an assistive technology expert at hand. So just to kind of review, get some final notes through, because we got to level up one more time. What do your processes look like for each of those areas? Try this out. Do just a little bit of a thought exercise of what's one thing you can do to change your process, or one person that you can pull in and maybe increase their agency and capacity as well. This is where I've pulled many of the sources from, if you'd like to look at the full articles. And just to let you know, some of the handouts that I have also provided include a worksheet with helpful websites that go through different things such as assessment, consideration, and evaluating effectiveness, as well as some demonstration implementation plans, documents that come from the Georgia Project for Assistive Technology, documents from the SEP framework, as well as a link to where you can learn more about the task demand analysis. So I hope that these materials are beneficial for you in trying to make changes that can overall influence whether a student adopts or abandons their assistive technology.
Thank you for watching. For more information on the ATP education program, please visit our website at atp.nebraska.gov/education or email us at atp.education@nebraska.gov.